a comment on that video about Microsoft killing your hardware and migrating to Linux for gaming. And this absolute milt managed to be wrong about literally everything in a single paragraph. Every claim factually demolished. Every suggestion worse than problems is trying to solve. So today I'm doing an autopsy on this masterpiece of competent twonkery. I rate you lot. So here it is. In all its glory, Ares 23DC writes, headaches on Linux are countless, and more in number compared to Windows. Most MMORPGs and multiplayer online games don't work in Linux. If your hardware is not supported by Windows 11, it means it's way past its upgrade time. Intel's 7th Gen series has been released 9 years ago, and Ryzen 1st Gen is pure crap anyway. Just upgrade that shit. If I want to play single-player games, I play them on Windows 10 or 7, offline machines. No point for Linux at all. Beautiful! Now on surface, this looks like your standard Linux bad comment, right? But what makes this one special, what makes this Twonk Chronicles material, is that every single point he makes actually argues against himself when you look at data. He's not just wrong, he's also proving our case while thinking he's dismantling it. Let's start with easiest to demolish. Most MMORPGs and multiplayer online games don't work. Right, let me just list what's running on Linux right now. Final Fantasy XIV, running brilliantly through Proton. Even has a dedicated community launcher called XIV Launcher built specifically for Linux. World of Warcraft, been running on Wine and Lutris for years. People have been raiding on Linux since before Proton even existed. Guild Wars 2, Elder Scrolls Online, Star Wars, Old Republic, EVE Online, Black Desert Online, all work. RuneScape as a native Linux client. That's not a niche list of games barely anyone plays. These are biggest MMORPGs on planet. He's confusing League of Legends with super invasive rootkit disguised as anti-cheat with most games don't work, which is classic anecdotal evidence dressed up as universal truth. Games that genuinely don't work at once blocked by kernel level anti-cheat, and that's a specific subset, not most. I've already covered this in previous videos, with over 80% of Steam's top 100 games playable, tracking up to 90% at top 1000 games on Steam. And I guarantee you this twonk is playing those few in other 10%. But if Linux gaming were as broken as this twonk reckons, I'd love for him to explain March 2026 survey to me. Linux just hit 5.33%, up 3.10 points since single month. Its biggest jump in Steam survey history. And Windows dropped another 4.28% in the same month. If Linux gaming didn't work, that number would be going down, not replacing Windows losses. Over 82% of Linux gamers on Steam are English-speaking, by the way, so don't even think about saying that it's just Chinese internet cafes bollocks either. These are real people playing real games on real hardware right now. Now let's address point where he really goes off track. If your hardware isn't supported by Windows 11, it means it's way past its upgrade time. No, mate, it means Microsoft drew an arbitrary line at TPM 2.0 and 8th Gen Intel to force an upgrade cycle that benefits them and hardware manufacturers. A 7th Gen i7 still runs games perfectly well. Ryzen 1st Gen, which he calls pure crap, benchmarks competitively in plenty of modern titles at 1080p. These aren't broken chips. The chips Microsoft decided aren't allowed to run their operating system anymore. That's an important difference he failed to comprehend. And his big solution? Just upgrade that shit. Alright then, let's price it out, shall we? Because we're in the middle of what people are calling Rampocalypse right now. DDR5 RAM prices have tripled across every region on the planet, with AI data centers hoovering up global DRAM production. OpenAI, Google, Meta, Microsoft, they're all buying memory at volumes and prices that dwarf what customers can pay, and manufacturers are prioritising those contracts over us. A standard 32 gig DDR5 kit at 6000 MHz, which is your gaming sweet spot, now starts at around 330 quid. Average is closer to 500. A year ago, that same kit were 80 to 110 quid. We're talking 3 to 4 times price. So let's add this up for Ares 23DC's just upgrade strategy. New CPU costs 7th gen Intel supported. That's 175 quid plus. New motherboard costs sockets changed. That's another 100 quid plus. DDR5 RAM costs your old DDR4 won't fit in new board. That's another 330 quid thanks to Rampocalypse. MSI's own CEO confirmed price increases between 15 and 30% across entire range in 2026. And it's not just RAM. Motherboards, GPUs, SSDs, everything that uses memory is affected. So you're looking at 600 quid minimum just to satisfy Windows 11 entry requirements for hardware that were working perfectly fine yesterday. Or, and this is a bit that seems to wreck people's brains, you install Linux for free and keep using everything you've already got, including your DDR4 RAM that works perfectly well and didn't cost you a penny extra. And here's the thing that completely demolishes his old hardware narrative. Let's look at who's actually gaming on Linux according to that March 2026 Steam survey. RTX 3060, 3070, 3080, all well represented. RTX 4060, 4070, 4090, even RTX 5080 and 5090 users are already on Linux. AMD RX 7900 XTX, RX 9070, 67% AMD CPUs, most running 3.7 GHz and above. 16 gig of RAM at sweet spot at 44%, 32 gig at 28%. These aren't hand-me-down rigs from a skip. People are running current and last-gen high-end hardware and choosing Linux deliberately, not 'cause they can't afford Windows, or 'cause their hardware's too old, but 'cause they actually prefer it. My own rig is an RTX 3080 Ti with 32 gigs of RAM running CashieOS with a custom kernel. That's not a budget build held together with hope. I'm running Linux 'cause it's better for what I want, not 'cause I'm too skint for a Windows license. But I want to laser focus on his just upgrade mentality, and I'm going to turn it into something genuinely uncomfortable. 'Cause it ain't just bad financial advice during a memory shortage. It's an environmental disaster on a global scale that nobody in gaming scene seems to want to talk about. 62 million tons of e-waste gets generated globally every single year, and it's growing by 2 million tons annually. There's over 347 million tons of unrecycled e-waste sitting on this planet right now, and only 17.4% is properly collected and recycled. Rest ends up in a landfill, or gets shipped to developing countries where communities, including kids, are picking through toxic materials for scraps of copper. Poor e-waste management causes around 78 billion quid in damage to human health and environment every year, according to UN. And it takes 240 kilograms of fossil fuels, 22 kilograms of chemicals, and 1.5 tons of water to manufacture a single computer and its monitor. That's more than weight of a car just to build one PC. I mentioned it before that Dell estimated 500 million PCs worldwide can't run Windows 11 because of hardware requirements. 500 million machines that Microsoft is telling people to replace. And people like Ares 23DC are out here cheerleading that decision, saying just upgrade that shit, while an entire generation simultaneously lectures everyone else about saving planet and reducing waste. You can't post about climate change on Monday and tell people to bin the perfectly working computer on Tuesday just 'cause Microsoft said so. Linux will run on every single one of those 500 million machines, with no TPM requirement, no secure boot mandate, no arbitrary hardware cut-off. You can install Linux Mint on a 10-year-old laptop and it runs better than it did on Windows 10. This isn't just a tech argument anymore, it's an environmental one. Linux is the single biggest anti-e-waste tool available to consumers right now, and nobody's framing it that way. Every PC that gets Linux instead of a landfill is a win for everyone, except Microsoft shareholders. And I had a laugh at his grand solution for single-player gaming, which is to run Windows 10 or Windows 7 offline. Now, Windows 10's end of life were October 2025. It's been unsupported for more than 6 months at this point. No security patches, no updates, no fixes. Windows 7 hasn't had security patches since January 2020. That's over 6 years of unpatched vulnerabilities on an operating system he's actively recommending people use. And his plan is to run them offline like a digital hermit, disconnected from everything, because apparently that's lesser headache than Linux. But Scotty, you said offline, so security don't matter. Sure about that? You're still plugging USB drives into that machine, downloading game files from somewhere to get them onto it, and potentially connecting it to your network to transfer data. Offline in 2026 don't mean what it meant in 2005. And even if you genuinely air-gap thing, you've now got a separate computer sat in your house that exists purely to play single-player games on a dead operating system. That's its solution, a dedicated gaming museum piece that does next to note. But those of us on Linux just click play on Steam and game works, while still being able to play online from a single machine, even if it is older hardware. And looking closer at Steam's survey, Windows 7 sits at 0.08%. There are more people gaming on Arch Linux alone, distro everyone calls too complicated for normal people, than on Windows 7 in its entirety. His sensible strategy has fewer users than a distro he'd probably dismiss as too nerdy. That tells you everything you need to know about how many people think running Windows 7 offline in 2026 is a good idea. Adding it all up, he's more or less described a setup that's more expensive because you need to buy new hardware for Windows 11 at over £600 during a RAM shortage. Less secure because you're running unpatched operating systems with 6 years of known vulnerabilities. Less convenient because you're maintaining offline machines specifically for gaming like it's 1998. More environmentally destructive because you're throwing away working hardware that Linux had happily run for another decade. And somehow, he's convinced himself this is a superior approach to just installing Linux and carrying on with what you've already got. That, my friends, is what I call a cry for help, rather than a solid computing strategy. So it is with great honour and absolute zero respect that I present Ares 23DC with a Scotty McGaming Twonk Chronicles merit badge for services to confidently incorrect computing, for recommending people spend over £1,000 on hardware you don't need during worst RAM shortage in years, for advocating unpatched operating systems from 2020 as a viable gaming strategy, for claiming most MMORPGs don't work on Linux when literally all at bestons do, and for telling 500 million PC owners to just upgrade that shit while planet drowns in millions of tons of e-waste. Ares 23DC, you are hereby awarded rank of e-waste ambassador, first class. Wear it with pride, kiddo. Look, I'm not saying everyone needs to switch to Linux. If Windows works for you and you're happy with it, crack on. But don't sit in comments telling people to bin their perfectly working hardware, run unpatched operating systems offline, and spend over £1,000 on upgrades they don't need during a global memory shortage, and then act like Linux is run with headaches. Data's all there. Games work. Survey numbers are climbing every month. And every PC that gets Linux instead of a landfill is a win for consumers. If you've got a comment that deserves Twonk Chronicles treatment, you know where to find me. Nominations are always open, and I've got badges to spare. And if you like this video, YouTube says you'll like this and next. So check that out, and I'll see you there, you magnificent.